Can you hear me back there? Perfect. I got to get used to this. So I'm about to turn 50, so I know I shaved today, so you're not seeing the white on my beard. I have a story like the rest of you. I've survived the financial industry since 1991 when I graduated university during a really bad recession. And I was about to go to law school, and I realized my parents had lied to me because I got a job working for a brokerage firm, and I realized I didn't have to spend another 4 years in school before I could pay off my student loans. I could actually start trading securities. And do you guys remember what, I don't know what happened in England, but I know what happened in North America. Banks were starting to sell mutual funds, so mutual funds became really crazy, and interest rates were dropping. Remember when we had crazy rates? They were dropping down to like ridiculous numbers, like, well, right now they're ridiculous, but they were ridiculous next to like CDs or GICs earning 12%, you know, and people are only getting like 4%. So the mutual fund industry just took off. And you really didn't need to know anything back then either. Thank God the markets did so great in the 90s, because I would have been sued because I knew nothing about investing. And it wasn't regulated. And if you were an accountant or a lawyer, you were regulated at the time. But you could go and get a fund license or a brokerage license, and you could take someone's life savings and blow it, and it was the Wild West. Well, what happened was in Canada, there was a woman who became a governor of the Securities Institute, and she wrote this damning paper on how advisors were crooks, how they were going on trips, they were selling whatever investment was happening, and she said, we need a designation that the consumer will know. And that's when the CFP came to Canada. So for any of you who don't have the CFP, it's a wonderful designation. I've had it for 22 years now, and it scares me that I can actually say 22 years. It scares me that I've been in the business 26 years. How did I come to succession planning? Because I think it's really important to share my story before we move on to the presentation. I joined the financial industry back in 1991, and I rode the wave. And I discovered something interesting in Canada, in the Income Tax Act. And you know, when you're young and you think you're on the leading edge, you find out that you're on the bleeding edge. I literally had these big eyes. You know, when you're young, you think you can take on the world, and then you find out the world was here after you were here. After you're here, the world will still be here, and you won't be. Well, I almost went bankrupt, but I was very fortunate because of my CFP, and the CFP was, there were very few CFPs at the time, but every university in Canada wanted to offer the CFP program. So I got recruited as a prof, and it was great. I had 11 years experience. I had taken all these exams, but I really didn't when I took the exams, I didn't have that experience. And I had to reinvent myself. And I was reading all the textbooks. I would call all the big publishers, and I said, hey, I teach over at Ryerson University. Can you send me these books because I want to check them out to see if they're worthwhile, like, to teach my students? And I was really reading them because I wanted to know how I was going to reinvent myself and what was going to happen in the future. And what I came to the conclusion was the succession planning was missing in planning, basically. So, and I didn't like the textbooks, so I wrote my own textbooks, because not only was I writing it for my students, I was writing it for myself to understand where the great opportunity was going to be. So let me just share you with some numbers, and the numbers are probably similar in the UK, but I'm going to share it in North America. There's belief that that 50% of all businesses in North America are going to go through some form of transition of ownership or management. 50%. Now, the problem happens to be is in most of the Western society, like Western countries, the pyramid is supposed to look like this with the population, but it's starting to look like this. And in North America, there's very few people my age who are Generation Xers. Like, you go into accounting firms, financial firms, and law firms, and you find out that there's a number of senior partners who are, let's say, in their late 50s and early 60s, or mid 60s, or even 70s, but you don't find very many Xers, you know, people who are probably early 50s, late 40s to take on the business. So right now, there's predictions in North America, there's $41 trillion worth of businesses that are going to go through a transition. Now, under the old model, when you had a population pyramid like this, where you had more younger people than old, only 80% of those businesses that would try to go through transition wouldn't be able to do it successfully. So what does that translate? In Canada, if there's going to be $3.7 trillion worth of businesses are going through transition, that means $3 trillion of those businesses are going to be gone. And the scary thing was, there was a gentleman who was an economist for a bank. He basically said that the economy potentially could shrink by 30%. Doesn't it scare you? And at that point, I realized when I read that stat and I was writing my books, I said, who are the front line? We are. Financial planners. So we're doing more than just like giving advice. Basically, we're providing a real service to our societies and to our clients, because if that transition is not done properly, that's what's at stake. Could you imagine your economy shrinking because there aren't the right people? And I'm looking at this room, and you know, many of you, there's very few financial advisors under 30, like people being trained. And this is a real problem. And succession is a problem, not just in the financial service sector, but it's also a problem throughout all of society. And unfortunately, and that's what I discovered in my research, very little had been written on it. So like everybody else, wealth management is facing a big dilemma, and I've got some stats here. This is the basic advisor is 50 years old. And it rises every year. Any of you sell insurance? Anybody here? No? Okay, the average age of an insurance agent is over 60. And the average age of an advisor doing wealth management is over 50. Only 22% are under the age of 40, and you can see 5% under the 30. And basically, it's very difficult for someone to break into this business right now. And the regulators aren't making it easy either. And most people who do not, most financial planning firms that do transition, most of the clients leave. And this is a real problem for a lot of firms. This is why it's really important to start mentoring younger people. But what I want to do right now is I want to do a parallel between our industry and an area that I focus on regularly. I sell regular businesses, and I'm going to share with you how I got into doing it. I would call myself the second spouse. And what I mean by that is many advisors have these clients, and you know that they have tremendous wealth, but it's tied up in their businesses. And now they're getting tired and they want to transition out. And their advisors who were there during the entire time, they position themselves to advise them, but the client doesn't see them being able to help them make the transition. So someone shows up, they make the presentation about how they're going to help transition out through tax planning and liquidating, selling these companies, land and whatever, and actually making these illiquid business assets into personal assets. And I don't know if many of you know this, but most bank branches have more money than financial advisors do, because business owners keep their money relatively very conservative. And they need you to make the transition. If you're not having that discussion, someone else is going to have that discussion. And unfortunately, very few people who are advising their clients right now, they allow themselves to be pigeonholed. And I had that happen to myself. The best thing that happened when I almost blew up back in 2002 is I got to start all over again with some knowledge, because I basically got to go and position myself, because my first clients were my worst clients. Would anyone agree with that? Like, how many of you would like take calls any time from a client when you first started, or you would like run over to their house and everything, and then you start getting busy and you start maturing, and they still expect this? because you didn't set the boundaries. It was very helpful that I made the changes. So what I'd like to do is I want to share with you, if you're in this situation or a client's in this situation, to look at these 4 categories when the discussion should start. Look at the age. If someone's been in business for 20 years, there's a good possibility they're very tired in doing what they're doing. Or I find between the ages of 55 and 70, that's the prime age for people to transition out. I find out people over 70 who have not made proper plans to transition out, they most likely won't, and they'll die with their boots on. And I've seen this again and again and again. And the reason is they've never made plans beyond what they're doing right now, or they feel they're too old to go and do something else. I was talking to a senior partner over at Deloitte, and they have mandatory retirement at 64. And what he shared with me was really revealing. He said most of the senior partners, they leave at 56 to 58. And I said, Harley, why? He says, because they believe that they have another kick at the can doing something else. So usually if you have a client who hasn't transitioned by 70, the odds of them transitioning out willingly is very little. And there's a saying, they say, you rather, well, no, it's the wrong saying. Well, what can you do? I'm jet lagged, okay? You have to accept, you have to work with me. Fatigue. You've been doing something for so long, you're tired doing it. You know, you're dealing with the same people. You want to change a venue. You want something else. So is the person tired? Are you tired? You know, and one thing I realized, I have some really, I'm working with a client right now who almost went bankrupt several times. He immigrated with a few $100s. Now we're selling a $120 million business. He's 62 years old. He knows he could grow the business. He knows he could do all sorts of things. He just can't do it anymore. Waking up at 6 in the morning, dealing with all the stress, and now his kids have come into the business, and which is a real disaster. His wife made the joke. She said he was never there when they were growing up, so he should learn to parent now, but they're in their 30s. But he's tired, and we're in the process of actually selling his business to a private equity firm. Money. Do you have enough money? Do they have enough money? We're going to be talking about it with advisors. How many of you, if you really sat down and you said that you were the shoemaker? I know that. My father was a tax accountant. The last tax return that he would do would be ours, because we're always focusing on someone else rather than ourselves. So do you have enough money? Because the reason we're working with money is because we want to make money. If you wanted to be in the charity business, you'd be in the charity business, right? And this is, so people have to know what their number is. And that we focus so much on other people's numbers, do we look at our number? And a lot of times, like, clients don't look at their numbers either. The future doesn't look good. There's new technologies, there's new competition, and you just want out. You don't want to go and reinvent yourself anymore. Your client doesn't want to reinvent themselves. And the last one is partners. I've seen this again and again. People start partnerships and they're really best friends when they started, and at the end of their careers, their families don't have anything to do with each other. They leave the office and have different social lives. You know that, I can't remember the name of the guys who wrote It's a Small, Small World. There were 2 brothers. They wrote the most beautiful songs. Disney thought they were the geniuses. Their families did not hang out, have anything to do with each other. And they couldn't stand each other. And these were 2 brothers. So you might not like your partners might not like you. Maybe you want to actually remember why you guys started working together, because you were really good friends. So those are the 5 indicators, either for yourself and also for your clients, that you should be aware of, because those are the indicators that have those discussions. And as I was sharing with you, if you're not having those discussions, somebody else is. Somebody else is going to have those discussions, and you're going to get a call one day thanking you very much for your 25 years of giving advice, but I'm now making this transition, and they're going to politely tell you that I don't think you're able to do it because they don't see you in that light. So if you're not starting that conversation, someone else is. So as I mentioned in the magic number, what is your magic number? Now, we all know that, because we're in planning, that while I personally don't agree with the 70% of pre-retirement income, because I know for a fact, doesn't matter if you have socialized medicine or not, most of your expenses are going to happen at the end of your life. You're going, if you want care, if you want to, like even medical care, like stuff that's not covered, you're going to end up spending more money. I know that 50% of all your medical costs are going to happen in the last 5 years of life, and if half the people in this room who make it to 85, we will have Alzheimer's. This is what the stats say. So what is your number? Most people don't know your number, and if you have your number, why are you staying doing what you're doing? And if you don't have your number, or your client doesn't have their number, how can you get to your number? And you can do off the trade-offs. We all do the financial planning: save more, earn more, take less. Those 4 levers that we're supposed to do. So if you have the number, good. This happens so often, and you guys are guilty of it as well. I'm guilty of it. I have been guilty of it. I usually give this presentation to accountants, so I'm sort of making fun of us. Where a seller goes to a broker, a business broker, and they try to sell their business, and they're offered a number they don't think is reasonable. And then they basically say, I went to my financial planner and my company has to be worth $5 million because this is what my financial planner told me I need, or 5 million pounds. But the reality is your company is only worth what someone's going to pay for it. And unfortunately, many people don't have a business, they have a job. Most people, they'll say that they have a financial planning business, but it's a job, because they have not properly created the infrastructure that they're replaceable. If you are not replaceable, your business really isn't worth much if you are the superstar, because clients will leave to someone else. And this is a key that you have to be aware of. Most people do not know what the value of their businesses are. So I just want to use from a business, because most people don't realize that if I gave you 2 examples, I'm just going to read this out. If your client has a company, has an income of $5 million, it can be assumed to be worth between 12.5, which is 2.5 times EBITDA, to 38.5, which is 7.7 times EBITDA. And that would be like profits, taking amortization and also your taxes. And those are what businesses are sold for right now. And you were given an option, and which one would you get the greatest return? You could take $5 million and you can invest it to increase your profits to $10 million, or you can reduce risk by 25%. I want to ask a question. Which one is going to yield the greatest rate of return when you sell your business, or when this person? Let me go and give you the options again. You take that $5 million, you invest it so you can increase your sales or your profits to $10 million. Or you don't increase your sales, but you reduce risk by 25%. You take that $5 million to reduce risk. When it comes time to selling the business, what's worth more to you in your pocket? Anybody want to, I'm asking, I'm putting up my hand, I know the answer. I want to ask, come on, I'm lonely, help me. Which one's worth more to you when you sell your practice or a client sells a business? Pardon? Reduce risk. The number, that is very true. Yes, you get a book. I brought presents from Canada. And your name is? Martin, I like you. This is yours, sir. Yes. You You cannot increase sales unless you have infrastructures, because they'll break down. How many of you have seen people who've overpromised and they underdeliver? You need proper accounting systems, you need proper staff, you need the intake, outtake, everything. So if you increase sales, this company would grow by 250% if you doubled it to $10 million, because it's 2.5 times earnings. But if you reduce risk, the value of this company is $33.5 million, an increase of $8.5 million over sales, and you haven't increased sales. Because when people buy your business, and this goes down to the first number we were talking about, they're looking at retention of that business. If you have not put in the proper infrastructure that tomorrow you can go on a plane, I fly back to Canada and it doesn't land there, my business still runs. If you haven't done that, you have a job, and your business outside yourself isn't worth anything, because it will not be there and the clients will leave. And I can honestly share with you, my father had a really great practice as a chartered accountant, and then he had a brain seizure and had a brain tumor, and we're talking, my mother had a fire sale. Because you know what his attitude about retirement was? He said, Peter, my clients are getting older, I'm getting older, they'll retire, that's how I'll slow down. How many of you really think that way? Come on, be honest. Come on, okay. Well, I used to think that. I sort of still feel that way. So this just goes on the risk. 2.5 to 7.7. Most financial practices sell between 2 and 3 times earnings. And again, it's because it's a service business, the buyout and the transition is much harder than a regular business. And finding a replacement is harder too, because people need the proper licenses. So who can you sell your business to? And this applies to you, and this also applies to the client that you want. There's 3 types of people. Family members. Well, I don't know about you, but I've seen people want to retire. This client I have, I told you the story. I said, like, his wife said, like, you weren't there while they were growing up, so now you have to parent? And he decided the only way he's ever going to retire is he has to sell the business. On top of that, he said, when I started this business, I was the first one to show up, and I was the last one to leave. I got 4 kids who basically who pushed themselves into my business. He overpays the market. I remember one son, he's paying him about benefits of like $250,000 a year. He says his market value is only about $45,000, right? And he feels he's an owner. And he basically points he says, I came into this business when I was young. I was the first one in. I was the last one out. None of my kids are always the last ones in and the first ones out. So if you want to sell to a family member, you're not really selling it. You're not getting out of your business. And this is what I've discovered. And you might not get your money either. Employees, key employees, grooming them. Well, that also creates a problem, because they don't usually have the financial wherewithal to buy you out or buy your clients out, and you're still involved. And what happens if they actually do a terrible job running your business? Like, they'll blame you for selling them a lemon and whatever. You want to get out as quickly as possible, and if you're selling your business or a client selling a business, they want to cut ties. They want to go and give the keys and not worry about it. And you sell to the first 2 categories, most likely, you will not be able to be free. The best is to sell to a third-party purchaser. And that would be a lot. I'll share with you what's happening in the accounting community. Because a lot of these independent accountants who have really good practices, what they're doing is they're selling to larger firms. And that's how they're getting their succession planning. They're or if they have a number of accountants and they've got these partnership agreements and they don't have the succession plan in place, like they've brought in younger people, they've trained them. They join these firms, so at least they'll be able to get some type of retirement. and their practices are not worth what they thought, because your practice is only worth what someone's willing to pay, and you need someone who can pay. And the reason I use the example of the accounting community is you need a level of education and certification, so it's not easy just to find someone. It's very easy if I have a window and door manufacturing company that I could find someone, because they don't need a special certification or licenses or E&O or all that stuff. So this is something that's really important. So a lot of people are actually flipping it over to larger firms. And I had a great conversations with some of the vendors, and this is what they do. They require people to move their practices over for about 2 times, 2 reviews, and then they'll buy them out, and they'll bring someone in, maybe a paid employee who does not have clients, who will help transition younger, and then after those 2 or 3 years, they will buy them out, sometimes immediately, because the clients have transitioned over to the new people. So it's really important to find those, to figure out what your exit plan is going to be. But the best way to get paid is to go to someone who has big pockets, who's not related to you or doesn't have like a strong relationship to you. So exit planning is multi-process, and you need a lot of different expertise, and you guys have it, and you're the best suited to do it. When I went back to school, when I started teaching, I basically was looking at what are all the things that I need, and I started asking, and that was the big question I was asking. And when I was putting together my textbooks, I was looking, okay, I want to sell a business. I want a wealthy client. They're probably, who are they? They're probably over 50 years old. They have most of their money in their company. What are their concerns going forward? Because as human beings, I can't tell you what the next technology is going to be, but I can tell you as a human being, different stages of life that we all go through, because people don't live forever. And I started asking, what do I need to be able to work with these people? And the question is, are you going to be a specialist or a generalist? So these are just basic things, skill sets that you have to develop. And again, is my presentation going to be up up on the site? Is this going to be up later on the site or anything? I don't know. You're videotaping me, so I'm not going to spend too much time, but I'll just go briefly. The ability, some of the multi-approach that's going to be needed, the ability for the business to operate under management independent of the owner. If you have a financial planning practice, are you replaceable? Have you gotten a replacement for yourself who can take over the business? Because you don't want to be how my mother found herself. Like, she was fortunate she found someone who bought my father's practice. Compensation for the successor. How are they going to take over? And we're going to be talking about what some people do to groom people within a company to take over a company. What's the fair market value of your practice? Many people don't have a realistic approach to what their practice is worth, or either does a client. Developing formalized grooming plans, utilizing tax-effective transfer strategies. You know what I find out, which is more important than me getting the optimal EBITDA? It's doing the financial planning to reduce that tax bill. You know what happens with a lot of business owners? And this is something which people don't realize. One of the reasons most businesses, about 90% of them, will never sell is because what people take from their business and the little games they play with their tax planning, whatever, what they're offered, what could be verified through figuring out what their business is worth, they look at it and say, it's not worth it because I'm going to be paying so much taxes. I might just run it until the wheels fall off. So these are things you have to consider. So this is going to go over. What I'd like to get to is this. This is key. I met a gentleman who worked for the Naval Academy, and it was a question that I was wrestling with. The difference between a generalist and a specialist. So we are trained as generalists, but we probably are also specialists in a specific area. What is a generalist? What's a specialist? Well, there's this really great chart I want to focus on, because this is the key if you want to be successful to decide what you are. A generalist actually looks at managing the relationships of the various people. Valuators for companies, the accountants, the lawyers, the wealth managers, they deal with everything. And that's what financial planners do. They're perfectly seated to work with the client to actually manage those relationships. So they manage the relationships. It's very political. I find myself, when I'm brought in to do M&A work, to sell a business, I'm basically managing the workflow to get everything ready to sell the business. And I'll just share with you like a nightmare I had. I had a client who had an EBITDA, real profits of $14 million. However, he had several companies. He made it so that he was only showing profits of $500,000 a year. He called it creative accounting. That's great. But now we have to prove how much his company is really making, even though like the cars are paid for. He's basically putting everything into inventory. You know, and a lot of business owners are like this. To manage the flow, we had to go and get his financials in order. We had to go and get a quality of earnings done. Like that was really difficult to actually show what the real numbers were. We needed evaluators to come in. We had to do the tax planning as well, because what good is him selling his business? So the company was earning $14 million, but we could only prove that it was earning $9.5. So basically, because this person did not do planning ahead of time, they've lost about $30 million on the sale of the business. See, this is a really great lesson. What we also had to do is the tax planning, because what good is, you know, getting a great number, let's say 7 times what the company earns, if the government's going to take half of it? So you don't want a fire sale. So that had to be planned. And then the execution, and then the negotiation. How long does the person have to stay? Because usually people are not just going to give you money and say thank you. That doesn't happen. How are we doing for time, guys? Oh, beautiful. You guys are great. You guys are so quiet. I was like hoping you'd talk to each other. You'd actually say, this guy sucks. You know, you throw things. You guys are so British. You're so polite. If you're American, you'd be like throwing things at me. I'm going to teach you something. People say Canadians are really, really nice, and they use the word sorry all the time. Have you guys ever heard that? They're always saying sorry. You never heard that before? Well, the thing is, that's what we do. There's a law in Ontario where I was born, which is the province, that you can't be held responsible. Let's say you got in a car accident and you say sorry obsessively. Because what it means in Canada is, I recognize your discomfort, now let's go on. It's not like I really empathize with you, but for someone who doesn't know what it is, it's like, wow, like I'm blown away here. You guys are really direct. I have to go to the washroom or the bathroom, you guys say toilet. Toilet. That would get me stares. So this is key. You have to identify what you are. Am I a specialist? Do I just manage money? So you set yourself up with generalists, CPAs, lawyers, whoever who are dealing with these people are going to be the generalists and dealing with it. So in some aspects, I'm brought in just to do something specific for the tax planning, and someone else is managing the process of selling, liquidating, and coming up with all the money. Or are you a generalist where you're now going to manage all those relationships? And I got to tell you, the bigger the clients are, and the other advisors you're dealing with, and I learned this firsthand because my textbooks, I didn't write them myself. My last one had 54 contributors. I found a nice way to express what I think of some of these people. They had big personalities, and you have to manage those personalities. And you have to have boundaries as well. Or are you the specialist who's just going to be brought in to manage the assets when it gets liquidated, and you're going to help do it in the most tax-effective way? You have to decide where you are. And then you have to be a lighthouse and broadcast to everybody what you do, so they know when that situation comes up, you're the person to go to. That's just what I've discovered. So who's going to be brought in to sell your practice or for your clients? What relationships should you have? An investment banker, someone who has deep pockets, if it's going to be a third-party buyer, or if you're going to buy someone's practice, someone who's going to help finance it. I know a number of insurance companies. I was explained that one of the insurance companies here, I'm not doing, they're a gold sponsor, so I should throw their name out, right? Because they're sort of paying for me today. Standard Life has something called 1825. Don't worry, I don't work for Standard Life. They left Canada. They basically will help. They will fund transitions, buy people out, where you have to bring your practice over to their plan, to their platform, and they'll take out an entire firm or an individual. So investment bankers, do you have those relationships? Because every time someone comes in that you don't have a relationship with, that's a potential that this person's going to whisper in your client's ears, and you're going to lose the client. Has anybody ever had that happen? Where someone else comes in and they don't have your interest, you don't know them, and the next minute you know you're getting a call and you don't have the client anymore? I've had that happen. I'm anal now. Like, we're talking, if you're not my ally and you're working there, if I see any indication that you're not going to be my ally, I'm going to be the guy whispering in the client's ear to go and have him leave you. I know that sounds terrible, but I'm going to be the one, going and marginalizing you. So you want to make sure that these people are all on your team. Investment banker, attorneys, you guys are the financial planners. Insurance professionals, and that should be CA, right? Like, you guys are still CA? Until recently we were CAs, but we're so close to America, we don't even know if we're British or we're American. Actually, I can't tell. Like, I grew up in an era where I used Fahrenheit and I used Celsius, and I don't know I drive with kilometers, but I don't know my height in centimeters, and I only know my weight in pounds, and you guys call them stones, right? See, I've been here almost a week. I know these things. These are relationships that you need to invest in. Because if you're going to help your clients transition, or you're going to transition yourself, these are people that you should have in your back pocket, and they have to be people who support your business. And there's 3 questions that we should ask when we're working with anybody, and they're really simple. 1, does the person share our values? And number 2, can we work with them? Because in essence, I'm over in Canada. If I'm sleeping half the day while you guys are like up in the morning, I might not be someone you can work with. And lastly, is there opportunity? And what they found out in nature is this: no 2 separate species can share the same niche if they do the same thing. Think about that. No 2 people can make a living doing the same thing. That means if you have partners, one might be really good at the administrative, the other one might be good at sales. But if both people are salespeople, that's not good. If both people are administration, you're going to never get a client. So these people you choose, they have to help you. They have to, 1 + 1 = infinity, not 1 + 1 = -20. So this is really key. These are people. And this is what they do when you're actually selling a practice. I work with a gentleman out of Chicago. He's a business partner of mine. He wrote a book called The $10 Trillion Opportunity. We're now rewriting that book. It was really big in North America on succession planning and M&A work. It's 41 trillion. He got the number wrong. It's worse than anybody ever thought it was. And if we throw in the rest of the world, it's worse. And I'm going to leave you with the opportunity. But this is the breakdown. what people do in a disciplinary. They identify personal objectives. Well, you're going to have the CPA who does it. You're going to have the financial advisor, the legal advisor, the investment advisor. Evaluate business and determine current value. It's usually the CPA, investment banker, and it's / valuator. And you need someone who's objective to do it. Like, for example, when you hire an accountant to do quality of earnings, in a lot of cases, to validate it, you feel that they're not even on your side because they're going to discount a lot of stuff. Develop personal plans. This is where you come in. Very special. You're a generalist. This is why you need to know where each of these people fit in. Develop exit strategies. You can be this level, but usually they're not. Now, this is Richard Jackman, who's a lawyer, and I think you noticed that he had a bias here, right? He forgot to leave a pencil there. Improve business performance. That's very important. We talked about that. Do you reduce risk? Because if you're going to sell your business and you don't have your number, you have to reduce risk. If someone does not have their magic number, that's an issue. How are they going to do with the estate taxes, the planning, the capital gains, all that stuff? I just sat down with someone, their parents left the country, left England, because of the estate taxes for their kids. So now they're visitors. They've given up their residency and everything to save all their money on dividends and stuff like that. Review the insurance need for the estate planning, develop investment plans with the sales proceeds. And this is the part I was sharing with you. Many of the best clients you have, I want to take a survey, and this is an anecdotal. I've discovered that most of my business clients who are really successful have very little money sitting in investment accounts. Who's discovered that? You're like the wealthiest business owners have very little in like pension plans or investments. And the money they do have is the most conservative thing you've ever seen in the world. And you know, we're all taught, oh, you should have like this mix, like 60% equity, 40% if you're conservative fixed income. But when you take the equation of their business being 95% of their wealth, and they only have, let's say, 5% of their wealth sitting in, let's say, a fixed income product, they're 95% equity. So they're really conservative with the cash they don't control. And most of them are control freaks. They control what they do. But when they make the transition, and when you make the transition, this is all the money you're ever going to have. How are you going to reduce the taxes and make sure that it lasts forever? And that's where they might be, and this is something that's really important to understand. They might be brilliant at making money and doing what they do, but they need us because this is not something that they ever did. Or they had to ever think about it and they haven't had the training. And anybody who thinks that they can take one expertise that they developed over ever and now they've got the golden touch, the Midas touch. I don't know if you've seen it. I've seen clients who make a fortune in one business. Now they start every other business that they go in, they lose money. And help with the, assist the owner with post-exit issues. So I want to share with 3 examples that I've actually dealt with, and it goes down to what we were talking about, who you sell it to. First, I call it Ike Does It Right, Family Members Succession Planning. I was very fortunate to meet the first second-generation McDonald's owner in Canada. His uncle had brought the McDonald's over to Canada, and it was his uncle through his mother. Like it was his through marriage. And she was very close to his father, so they brought him over to Canada, and they found out he was a terrible businessman, and they decided to give him a franchise, and they had him outside of a major city. So the son took over that franchise, which was the first one, which was basically the brother didn't want his sister to be out on the street, so they gave the first McDonald's franchise. So about 15 years ago, what happened is one of the kids said, I've got ketchup in the blood. Could you imagine all they talk about is burgers and things like that? Like that Fast Food Nation movie must have killed, well, I know it killed them. But, so what he did is he did something really important. He went to McDonald's, who never had a training program. because this is going to be the first third generation person. They implemented a training program, which was, because they had to, unlike most business owners, and this, you guys are very similar to, let's say, a franchisee, they needed approval for the person who took over the franchises. Similar that you need people who have the proper license and the proper training to be able to take over your practice. You just can't sell it to someone on the street because they say they want to do the business. He brought in all his advisors. They created a special training program, and he was able to transition out. He put proper pension plans in. He put in proper structures that he could get paid over time with the business. And I'll share with something that was really interesting. McDonald's, they have something in their contracts that say that you have to live within 50 miles of your franchises, so he could never really go, like, leave for long periods of time. But because his children went in and they were going to run his 5 franchises, now he could go to Florida. So he did it right. As soon as he realized his kids wanted to take over it and they said, Dad, we've got ketchup in the blood, he sat down with McDonald's and they put together a training program. And it wasn't him, they put it together. And then he also called in all his professionals and said, this is what we want, how do I do it the most tax effectively? And at the end of the day, his daughter and his son are the first third generation owners of McDonald's in Canada. He did it right. Richard makes his employees happy. So Richard's kids, Richard comes to Canada with no money in his pocket. He builds a business, and you know what his kids do? They don't want the business, even though it paid for such a beautiful life. It's probably a better business. They become dentists and doctors and lawyers, right? Like, this is what happens, right? You don't want your kids to slug it out with you. So he had a very unique business, and it was very difficult for him to find an external buyer. So what he did is he looked at key managers who had an interest, and he did a stock purchasing plan, an employee stock purchasing plan, where he structured it that from earnings, this money was going to go for them to, I'm almost done. From earnings, it would go and pay him out. And he structured it so that he was able to hand over it to key people because he groomed them. And he made it so that he would be paid out. And his employees are happy because no longer are they working for a family business. There's an opportunity for them to become boss. And that's a problem with a lot of small businesses. People say, well, why should I stay here? Because I know my place. And in essence, the really smart people, they want to have the ability to grow. And that's how you won't retain them and you'll lose them. The last one is John Banks sells and cuts ties and goes off and enjoys his life. He found a third-party buyer who had deep pockets, who gave him $40 million. They had a hold back, because mostly they won't give you all the money because you have to prove everything for a year or two, of about 25%. But he cut ties. After 6 months after the transition, he left. And he's happy, because he doesn't have to deal with family members or employees anymore who are complaining about the lemon that he sold them. No, it's not a lemon, it was a great business. So I want to leave this with you, and now we're at the end. I'm really good at this. Thank you. I got 10 minutes now? Oh, you said I had 5. Oh, this is good. I love talking. At home I'm not allowed to talk, and no one values what I say. And my pockets are always empty, so I always feel honored when people are listening to me, because it rarely happens when I go home. So let's just talk about your practices, because I know this is what was sold, but I want you to remember, think of the parallels between the clients you want and yourself, because the only difference between the client who is preparing to sell their business and yourself is time, because each young person, each vibrant person will become an older person, and they won't be able to continue what they're doing. And the greatest healer for anybody later on in life is to mentor younger people. And I find this all the time. I sit down with business owners all the time, and they always give me unsolicited advice because they want to share their knowledge, and it's really important for them. But let's talk about the FA. Technology. A lot of young people want technology. I know for a fact I deal with a lot of dental practices that are sold. Young people don't want to take over these practices that are using equipment from the 50s. So are you modernized? Because you might be making money, and that's great, but it might be difficult for them to make money because you haven't systemized anything for them. And young people do everything on their computers. This is going to be online, I promise you. If you email me, I'll send it to you. But I thank you for taking a picture of me. Can you send that to me? No, just joking. Defining the career path for students to FAs. Do you actually have a program where you're going to help them get educated and everything? Because you know what the problem with our business? Since they got rid of career agency in a lot of the financial sector, there's no career path for people to become professional advisors anymore. And the regulators make it almost impossible for someone to start out. And I know the rest of the world is looking at the UK and Australia, because since you implemented no commission, 75 to 80% of the population has no advice anymore. And it's almost impossible for a young person to start out. So the question is, are you going to help, if you are going to mentor someone, because this has to be growing someone within, how are you going to help them grow? And it's going to help you grow as well. Catering to the next generation's priorities in the workplace, well, that's a difficult one. That's just politically correct, because young people don't want to work. It's true. It's true. I see this all the time. I deal with accountants a lot of the time, and they tell me the biggest problem with retention is these people don't want to work before tax season, like 90 hours a week. They'll get a job working for corporations, and they have 9-to-5 jobs. But how are you going to prioritize that? Changing compensation, because people want to make more money. The better they do, the more they make, and you give them incentive, maybe like through a profit sharing plan that's going to lead to them buying your business out. That might be something. And if they decide not to stay in your business, you get to take it back. And establishing a mentorship program. And as I was saying, that what I discovered is the goals of the first half of life are different than the second half. Carl Jung called it the morning and the afternoon. In the beginning of life, we try to establish our ego. It's all about money. It's all about acquiring and building ourselves up. And that's a healthy life. To be healthy in the second part of life, my last word is to give it away and deconstruct and to help the next generation. And that is going to give you fulfillment emotionally, spiritually, and mentally. Not physically, because the only reason why you're thinking about these things is because you're not able to move like you used to. You guys have been wonderful, and I want to thank you, and I hope I've given you a lot of questions that you're going to go back and you're going to ask, how are you going to implement them? And I want to share one last thing with you. The picture of that book is my latest book. I just want to share one last anecdote, and I'm done. I promise I'm done. I gave one of my textbooks to one of the most successful business guys in Canada. It was this big. I didn't write it myself. I had 54 contributors. He said something to me very revealing. He said, Peter, I pay guys like you to read books like this so I don't have to. That's why your clients deal with you. They don't want to know this stuff. When I take my car to get fixed, I just want to know it's going to go A to B. I don't want to know what they do, right? So I looked at him and I said, you're right. And I spent the next 14 years crafting a story that talked about starting out a business, growing a business, and transitioning a business through mentorship, philanthropy, and this is how fulfillment is done. And if you don't have a philanthropy program in your planning practice, you will lose clients because they don't care about those cruises on the Mediterranean. The real mature people, the people who actually are the clients who are going to last, they're thinking about their legacy. They have children, they have grandchildren, they have stories, and they want to help and give back to society. And we have the greatest ability in this room, in this conference, to help them because we have skill sets that they don't have and they desperately need. Thank you so much for this morning. It would be really early in Toronto. You guys have been great. And again, if anybody wants to friend me on LinkedIn or email me, please do. And I'm looking forward to now. I've sung for my dinner, so I look forward to just being a guest here. Thank you. You guys have been wonderful.
We've probably got time for a couple of
Oh, please ask.
questions. So has anybody got any questions for Peter? Or are you that desperate to get to lunch? One down
Yes. Oh, wait, I was told about a microphone.
the ladies, just bring it down.
Oh, perfect. Yes.
I've been mentoring a young lad, a graduate. He knew nothing about the industry, came in from nothing, came in straight from uni and as a maths graduate.
Can you translate, when you say uni, you mean university, right?
He came from university.
You have to understand these terms are new to me, but yes.
All right. There's a 21-year-old.
Yep.
Knew nothing about the industry, and he has soaked the mentoring up and the training up like a sponge.
Yes.
The difficulty is finding those people in between who have some experience, who have some clients who are doing everything, what I said is the old way, the old commission flogging products way,
Yes.
and converting them because they are so stuck in the ways. Or
You know what Plato said, right?
what?
In the Republic? He says, he doesn't say kill them, but he says somehow get rid of the adults and start with just the children.
Yeah.
The thing is,
just
I
a longer
find for a
process.
lot of business owners I know, they rather take people who know nothing, and you can really form them to work within the structure you're dealing with, than someone who has these habits. You
Yeah.
know, where, for example, and I see this all the time. Let's say I'm doing, like someone's dealing with, the client needs insurance, and they really need it, but then they see that there's $500,000 sitting over here, and they're really money managers, and in essence, the first thing they do is they can't help themselves. They're going after the money, and they leave the insurance because they're not trained in holistic planning. So one of the things that people find, and I see this with all my business clients, is they always tell me getting someone who doesn't know anything about the industry so they don't have bad habits. Because those bad habits, like you always go, it's first in, last out. So those habits you formed are going to be, early on in your career, in your life, are going to be the last things that you're going to be able to change. It's easier to get someone who doesn't know, so they'll accept the reality that you're presenting to them. And that's just from my experience.
Thanks. I'm on the right track then. Keep thinking there's another picture. But
Are there any other questions?
One more down the front there.
Yes.
Based on the three different sectors and segments within sale over in North
You mean the bit like selling to family members, selling to employees, or third-party buyers? Yes.
Yeah, what do you see the sort of splits and percentages over in Canada and North America to be within this industry?
I find the last resort is probably selling to employees, because you can't find someone outside and you have to finance it, and you're basically, this is the last resort, and you're trying to create a buyer for yourself. I find that there's a problem that people are so concerned with their legacy, and they think Johnny over here has the ability to run the business. And I once sat down with a client. I'll just share with you the difference in mindset. I go to his factory, and he's complaining that his son doesn't have a work ethic. And then I look out, his son is like 23 years old, and he's got a beautiful BMW. I don't have that car. And I ask him, I say, John, why does he have this beautiful car? Like, why does he have this BMW? Like, he's 22 years old. Oh, it's a really safe car. It's a reliable car. And I looked at him, I called him on his BS. I almost said the other word. I called him out, and I said, no, when you were 16, you couldn't afford that car, so what did you do? You gave it to little Johnny Jr. because you wish you had it, and you're like this, you stole that ability to have that. So most parents, there's a accounting firm, a real example, they're really bright. You know what they've done? They've created something called Success Care. And what they do is they go into private businesses with a tough family, and they go and they try to educate the second generation or third generation to take over. You know how brilliant they are? Because the owner is just doing that to go and pacify their spouse. And they come to the conclusion that they want to sell the business to a third-party buyer. So what the firm does is they're basically collecting about $150,000 worth of fees to be able to sell the business. To get the owner to realize that their kids don't have what it takes. One of the tests for a family member is this. I suggest it all the time. Take $100,000 if it's a successful business owner and say, I'll give you $100,000, but I'm also selling shares of $100,000. And figure out if the kid takes the $100,000 and says, yes, Dad, yes, Mom, I'm going to put it into the business because I believe in the business, that person can be a business owner. But if that kid takes that money and buys himself a motorcycle and a trip through Europe, then you know that you should be selling the business because they're not owners, they're PhDs. You guys know what a PhD is? What is a PhD? You probably know. Papa has dough. Are there any other questions? Okay, last question, sir. And I'll stay here after.
Just about how early you incentivize with either equity or partial sales to the people you've identified within the team.
As soon as possible. But one of the things that's really important, when you do those plans, you say, I'm going to go and put money aside for you to help buy me out. But if they choose to leave, make those plans so the money can come back to you. That money is only designated to help fund your retirement. So they know that if they want to take over the business, and you see this with large companies that give stock options, and they say you can't exercise it unless you've been working X. Make it so that this that's being put aside for your retirement, it can be pulled back, that it's yours. Like I'm going to help you take over my practice, but if you choose to leave me, this is no longer yours, it's mine, because that's the purpose of this. I'm funding my own retirement by grooming my own replacement.
Thank you very much, Peter.
Thank you. You guys have been great. Thank you so much.